Yep, and welcome you all to this solidarity rally that we've called in support of NEU members in Tower Hamlets, 27 NEU members in Tower Hamlets who've been taking strike action today over proposals to restructure their service. These members work in something called the Tower Hamlets Support for Learning Service. They provide specialist support to children and families with special educational needs and disabilities. The service has been running for a good number of years now, and there's a wealth of experience built up by the people in this service, providing a valuable support to children in schools. The proposals that are in front of us at the moment is that the service would be changed and we would lose 13 posts. 13 specialist teaching posts will be removed from that service. And the proposal is that it become much more of an advisory service rather than providing face-to-face support for children and for teachers and support staff in schools. So the members have been on strike to defend their jobs and their pay, but it's also important to point out, and we've been pointing out today and throughout this process, that they are standing up for children and defending education. Children with special needs have been at the wrong end of the COVID-19 crisis. They've suffered disproportionately and have really been affected by it. And the work done by this service during the COVID crisis has been well regarded and welcomed by parents. So it's a strike about jobs and a strike about pay, but it's a campaign about education. And one of the things we've been highlighting throughout this is the gap in funding provided by the government to local councils for SEND funding. We estimate something like £1.6 billion is needed by councils just to keep up with the needs of these children. So it's very much a campaign that is facing the government as well as trying to persuade our council not to make these cuts. The members on strike have been out today in the streets. It's difficult striking during this period. Buildings are closed, so there haven't been picket lines, but we've been out talking to the public and demonstrating and getting support from passers-by. We had sirens from the FBU and ambulance service to support our little protest today, so we're very pleased with that. We've got a number of speakers today that we've got lined up, but we very much want to hear if you've been on strike today and you want to say something about that, or if you've joined us from another part of the country where you might be facing similar, just pop a message in the chat if you want to say something to the meeting, and we'll see if we can fit you in. Our first speaker though, and I'm really pleased to welcome her, is Mary Bousted, who is the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. She's going to kick us off. And I'm reliably informed, we're all very zoomed out at the moment, I think, at the end of term, but I'm reliably informed that this is Mary's 7th Zoom meeting of the day. So Mary, that might be a record. And I'm assuming you're here. I saw you come in earlier. Mary, you are here. If you want to unmute yourself.
Hi Alex, I am here.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And it's really good to be joining the NEU members from the Specialist Support Service in Tower Hamlets who have been on strike today to defend their service, to save their service. I'm not going to speak for long because I know that lots of people will want to speak, so I just wanted to say a few things. I just wanted to bring a bit of a national picture to the issues that are being played out in Tower Hamlets today and since the announcement was made by the council, by the local authority. So we all know that SEND provision is in crisis, and we know that that crisis is failing our most vulnerable children, those who already face significantly different and greater challenges in life, and those children and young people who most need expert support and help in order to thrive in education and achieve their potential in life. And we're seeing this crisis being played out in the courts because there's a huge rise in legal disputes between parents of children with SEND and local authorities who are seeing themselves an exponential rise in demand for SEND provision at the same time as a huge decrease in their budgets to cope with that demand. I was looking at I was sitting in on the select committee whilst the select committee was hearing evidence in person. So this is over a year ago, but I've never forgotten it. I was listening to Martin Keir, who is the parent of, he's a father of 2 deaf children. And I'll never forget a phrase he used. He said that parents' experience of navigating the SEND funding system, and he used these words, he said it's framed through struggle, a struggle to get entitlements with an inbuilt tension of funding where the responsibility to the public purse dominates over children's needs and their rights to educational opportunities. So because they can't get the support that they need and that their children need, parents turn to SEND and disability tribunals, and the number of parents going through the tribunals has doubled in recent years. And when parents do go to a tribunal, they overwhelmingly win. 89% of the cases that parents bring to an SEND tribunal, they win. And it's been suggested, and I think there is truth in this, that cash-starved councils are using disability tribunals as a gatekeeper, rationing support as they attempt to keep within their spending limits. Now, the numbers are important and they explain the problems that councils face, because SEND provision is not a minority issue. There are about 15% of the school population is now recognised to have some form of SEND. We know now that there are nearly 400,000 pupils and students with an educational and healthcare plan, and that's an increase of 10% on 2019 and an increase of 62% on 2015. So that's a far greater growth than anyone has anticipated. In the past year alone, there's been a 15% rise in the number of pupils with EHCPs attending independent schools, which are non-maintained special schools. And there's been very worryingly, I think, a 17% rise in the number of pupils with EHCPs in pupil referral units. And in the worst case, children are not receiving any provision at all. So we calculate that 1,260 pupils of compulsory school age are not in education at all. These are pupils with SEND. We know that councils, after years of austerity, and because of this increase in demand, have neither the personnel nor the resources to meet the demand. And actually, we have a high calculation, Alex. We reckon that in order to meet the shortfalls in the high needs block, funding should be £2.1 billion higher, assuming that the 2021 number of EHCPs are funded at the same rate as those in 2016. That's with inflation added. Now we know, obviously, today's strike is the result. No one wants to strike. You strike when there is no alternative. It's a hard thing to do. It's particularly a hard thing to do if you're supporting children and young people with SEND. But you do that because there's no alternative. And we are saying to the government, the DfE and the government, first of all, needs to do some proper research into the scale of the issues, the scale of the funding impasse for local authorities supporting SEND services. And in particular, do some real research about why disproportionately children with SEND are ending up in pupil referral units. Why are they ending up there? They are ending up there because they are not getting the support and the specialist support and help that they need in mainstream schools, which is where the vast majority of children with special needs should be, in mainstream schools, getting the support that they need so that they can prosper and thrive and achieve their potential. A diagnosis of a special educational need or disability should not be a diagnosis of failure. It should not be a diagnosis of struggle. It should not be a diagnosis of parents worried out of their minds. It should not be a diagnosis of frustration as children cannot access learning, cannot access the curriculum because their special educational needs or their disabilities are not being supported, catered for and met. And we know that the proposed cuts in Tower Hamlets will be devastating for children with SEND and young people who rely regularly on the support services for advice. They rely on the specialisms of our members striking today to give them the lifeline, to give them the access to education that they need. For many families, the support service is literally a lifeline. And in Tower Hamlets, we know that the local authority services that are being cut provide essential advice and support to schools, to teachers and to support staff and to leaders who need that specialist advice, particularly in the case of low incidence special needs and disabilities. A special need or disability that you're not likely to come across. You might come across it once or twice in your teaching career, and you need that advice and help in order to know what to do. Many teachers are at their wits' end because they want to do the right thing, but they don't know what to do. And they are finding that the specialist advice and support that they need is not there. That has been compounded as so many academies don't buy in to the funding, the support for from local authorities. And teachers in those academies in particular, and I've heard this so many times, are just left cut adrift and told that if they did a bit of CPD on their own or went on the website, they'd find out what they need to know. Absolutely, they cannot find out what they need to know. Schools cannot do everything, and they absolutely should be relying and paying for the expertise and professional services that special educational needs and disability specialists, such as our members striking today in Tower Hamlets, rely on. Their commitment, their professionalism, their expertise, their care and their concern for the children and young people who they support, who they want to succeed in life. I'm going to finish with, it's hard enough for parents and children with SEND. If these post-co, and if, as you say, Alex, these specialists become generalist advisors, then there will be consequences. Children will not get the support that they need. Schools will not get the support they need. Parents will find more than ever that their experience is framed through struggle. And of course, the other thing we know, and I'll finish with this, is that disproportionately children with SEND are also disadvantaged in other ways. They are disproportionately likely to be poor. They are disproportionately likely to have other disadvantages in life. SEND just doesn't come as a single diagnosis. It's compounded by other inequalities. So when we cut support for children and young people with SEND, we worsen all the disadvantages that compound in their lives. We increase their isolation. We take away their hope. We take away their reasonable request, their reasonable expectation, their reasonable hope that in a civilized society, they can have access to be fully participant in that society and contribute to that society what they are able to contribute. That they are not seen through the prism of their disability, they are seen through the prism of different ability and what they can differently bring to our society. And I'll finish with this. A society which does not value, support and provide access to children and young people with special educational needs is not a society which is in any way truly civilized. And that is why the services you provide are so essential. And that is why the NEU brings to you, through me and through Kevin, who also volunteered to be here tonight. I got here first. That's why it brings our solidarity, our support, and our continued solidarity and support for the essential moral, ethical, professional work that you do. And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm sure if we were in a room together, there would be a lot of resounding applause now for everything you said. People have really welcomed it in the chat. So thank you for coming along. I know you've had a long day and you may not be able to stay, but it's been really great to hear you.
I'm going to stay for as long as I can, till about 6 o'clock.
So as Mary says, our banner's a bit out of date. We said 1.6 million, it's 2.1 billion. So we'll have to change that now. This is a national crisis with a local flavour today. So I'm going to go straight to our next speaker, who's Alison Wagner, who is our NEU rep at the Support to Learning Service and a specialist teacher of the deaf and hearing impaired children. So Alison, we're going to hear from you, and then we're going to hear from Apsana Begum, our MP.
Thank you very much, Alex, and fantastic to see so many people here this evening. As Mary said, strike action is a last resort action. None of us wanted to take the strike action that we took today. We felt that we were backed into a corner and that was our last resort. So we've had a great day, we've had a lot of support from people, and we've had a noisy protest locally in Mile End. I'm just going to talk today about why we felt we had to take that action and where we are with our talks with the council, with Tower Hamlets Council. So the proposal to restructure the Support for Learning service was issued on the 23rd of September by the council. Now that proposal is to eliminate 50% of the posts at the Support for Learning service. This includes compulsory redundancies for highly qualified and experienced staff, some of whom have been working in the borough for 20, 30 years. Staff remaining would be on new contracts. They would lose their TLR points. They would be de-skilled into roles where there is much less teaching. They would be pulled back to statutory only work. They would also have larger caseloads because there'd be fewer feet on the ground to cover the number of children out in our schools. The head of the Support for Learning service post would be deleted. The team leader of the teachers of the vision impairment team would be deleted. The team leader of the DPH, the deaf partially hearing team, would be deleted. 2 teachers for specific learning difficulties would have their post deleted. 5 qualified teachers of the vision impaired would be slashed back to 2. 6 qualified teachers of the deaf would be slashed back to 3. There is no way that we would be able to do a good job for the children and families in Tower Hamlets on that level of staffing. There are high levels of need in the borough. As Alex said, I'm one of the teachers of the deaf. Tower Hamlets has 2.5 times the national average number of deaf children in the borough. Children diagnosed with a hearing loss are not going away. Children diagnosed with a vision loss are not going away. Families with children with SEND are not going away. The NEU balloted us because of this serious situation. We had over a 90% turnout and an over a 90% vote in favour of strike action. The council had plenty of notice of our strike action, but we were called to the table for talks just on Monday with ACAS. So our demands were to withdraw this current proposals to cut our service, to withdraw the threat of pay cuts and worsening terms and conditions for staff, to withdraw the threat of redundancies. We came to the table because we wanted constructive talks. Unfortunately, we've come away with nothing. The council were not willing to offer us anything. We'd love to talk further with them. We'd like to make progress on this. I just want to finish off here by saying that some of the work that we do is not in schools. Some of the work that we do is with babies and very young children who are not yet at school. And the purpose of that is to ensure that support is in place, that there is early intervention, that there's assessment, there's guidance for families through the very bewildering system of obtaining an EHCP or getting funding for their child. Part of that work is to ensure that some children go to school fully school ready. Sometimes we do need to have to resort to an EHCP. But our worst case scenario is that we're going to have families in our borough with poor early support. Some of them are going to be demanding EHCPs because they're worried about their children going into school without support. Some of them are going to be going to tribunals, as was just mentioned. And some of them will be looking for very expensive out-of-borough placements. This is also going to result in workload issues for SENCOs and teachers in schools, because some of these children will be arriving having had very little support and they will not be school ready. And then it will be on the lap of teachers and SENCOs to sort out the mess. I hope we can come to the table with the council to resolve some of these issues, and I hope that in future we will see a properly funded service for the children and young people and families in Tower Hamlets. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alison. I think the way you spelt out exactly what those cuts are is really quite chilling. And I think experience tells us that if we lose a service like that, if we lose expertise like that, it's really hard to get it back again. So thank you for doing that, and best wishes to all you and all your colleagues. Before I take our next speaker, I'm just going to share my screen with you for a minute to show you some of the messages of support we've had from all over the country. No, that's from, can you see that? There we go. If we go to the top, we've got Sheffield, Kirklees, Wakefield, Barking and Dagenham, Leicester, Swindon, NEU exec members, Knowsley, North Somerset, Lancashire, Hounslow, North Tyneside, Coventry, Somerset, Essex, Stockport, Holton, Ealing, Vale of Glamorgan, Hertfordshire, Gateshead, Dudley, Leeds, Wandsworth, Manchester, East Sussex, Waltham Forest, North Yorkshire, Portsmouth, Nottinghamshire, Wiltshire, Northern Region, NEU, Staffordshire, Helen Porter from the exec, South Gloucestershire, Greenwich, Birmingham, Barnsley, Cumbria, Bexley, Hillingdon, Nottingham, Hackney, Warwickshire, and the NEU National Officer Group. Too many to read out, but I think that gives you a flavour of what we're talking about and how big this problem of special needs funding is. I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker, someone who's worked with the NEU and other unions for a while on this campaign. She spoke at a big meeting we had for parents over a year ago, where we had over 150 parents in a school hall when we could do those things, talking about the crisis facing SEND children, and joined us when we handed in our petition to Downing Street just after Christmas last year with head teachers and parents and children. Really pleased to welcome Apsana Begum, one of our local MPs, to this meeting, and look forward to hearing from you, Apsana.
Thank you so much, Alex, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to join you this evening to discuss and to talk about the campaign and what a campaign it's been so far, and look at the messages that are coming through. I mean, you should, I think, all be proud of yourselves for standing up for what's right, standing up for communities locally that need all the support that they can get in this particular time. But also, you know, even last year, as Alex mentioned, you know, the meeting that happened last year, which I attended and others attended, which also highlighted how much this service has benefited so many people in Tower Hamlets. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about, you know, what I've learned partly about the service as well in the last few months. One of the things that I did was I attended a meeting recently with the National Deaf Children's Society, and there was a lot of parents actually that attended that meeting and spoke about the impact that this service has had on their children. And, you know, we're often talking about, and very recently there's been a lot of talk about, in the first 5 years of a child and how crucial that is in a child's life. And they spoke about how much support they got in those years for children who were found to be deaf or hard of hearing. And, you know, that kind of highlights for me, you know, the fact that this service is not just a service that exists in school, it's not just a service that exists in community centres, but it is going beyond that. And this service was something that came about to ensure that children with special educational needs and disabilities could stay in mainstream schools, could participate and learn alongside others, you know, and could also stay in Tower Hamlets. You know, and that's the beauty of the service, really, because it really recognises, really gets to the heart of the issue here, that nobody with a special educational need or a disability should have to be taken out of the context and the area that they're in. You know, they should be supported where they are. You know, and if anything that, you know, that's been seen through this pandemic, it is that how much, you know, we are so dependent on one another, and how much, you know, we need our neighbours, our friends, our local connections. So taking somebody out of that local area, taking them out of having the specialist support locally is a risk, and that's the kind of risk that this cut to this service will result in. And the second thing I wanted to say is that we've also got to look at, I think, the wider context of all of this as well, the climate of cuts that is continuing. You know, and the government no longer talks about it, and many others no longer talk about the fact that actually, you know, we're not post-austerity. We are still seeing cuts to our services, and that's what it is. It is cuts. So we are seeing cuts to this service. We've seen our local nurseries close down. You know, they were public nurseries, they closed down. We are seeing, you know, potentially the closure of daycare centres and other means of support that so many people locally rely upon. And it's really important, I think, what you're doing to highlight these as cuts and to highlight the, you know, the true impact and the true value of this service and how much the cuts not just hollow out the service, but actually change it, because I think it's really important to acknowledge as well a structure of a service. You know, if you cut, you know, the ability for staff to have a coordinator to head up a service, then you're really, you know, one, putting the pressure on other members of staff, and then reducing the quality of the service provision that can exist. And, you know, the work that's been done by so many members of staff in this service, you know, resonates with so many people because it covers such a wide range of educational needs and disabilities as well. And, you know, you can't, in this climate, whatever happens, we should not be in a place where we are thinking about cutting one area which, you know, looks or supports one particular type of disability and then, you know, retaining maybe support for another. That's just frankly unacceptable in my opinion. So that's the second thing I wanted to say, that, you know, we are looking at it in this wider context of what is happening locally, unfortunately, which is further cuts. Some of these which are pandemic decisions, and I have been making lots of representations locally and nationally on that as well, because we do need to resist that, and there are ways to resist that, and we need to keep up the pressure, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing to do that. And, you know, I sit, and as many of you know, I am a member of the Education Committee, and one of the reasons why I wanted to and chose to go on that committee is because I'm always conscious of the fact that here I am in a seat which has one of the highest levels of child poverty, if not the highest. You know, we have a crisis for children and young people in this constituency, and therefore it's absolutely vital that it's our number one priority to ensure that their development and their care is our number one priority, and to make sure that there is the funding and resource retained at this point in time, if not expanded, you know, particularly in this time, in a pandemic where it's not possible really to do reasonable consultations. You know, it's not possible to ensure that the right messages are being sent out to everybody that needs to hear it, to ensure that the support is there, because the pandemic, as we know, has exposed all of the vulnerabilities in our communities locally than ever before. And I think about this in the context of one of the schools locally. So in my constituency with Cyril Jackson, you know, becoming an academy, and how it's important to, you know, also oppose that, and you know, because we have to look at the education system, and we have to look at our children's care system holistically as a whole. And I think there are challenges here, but what I do see is that it's really, really good to see the fact that there is a huge mandate here. You know, you are all you're all part of a campaign that has got a huge mandate from members of the NEU, 95% to support this strike. And as you have said, and has been mentioned, you know, the strike is not a first option. You know, and nobody wants to be out on a cold December day having to, you know, shout out in the streets to say that, you know, we don't want this service cut. But you're having to do that because of the desperate situation that you find yourselves in. I've been speaking to many of my colleagues who have also been, you know, been informed about this situation here locally, who have sent messages of support today online and offline, and have been in touch with me directly to offer support. And I will keep doing everything I possibly can locally and nationally to try and help save this service. So solidarity and support, and I will be here for a little bit longer to also listen in and hear from you as to, you know, what's been happening in the last few weeks as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oksana. That's really welcome support from you as one of our MPs. I'm going to go straight to our next speaker, because there's a couple of people who want to get in who've got to go off to other things. So our next speaker is someone we've done a lot of work with recently. Tower Hamlets NEU and Unison have worked really closely together on various campaigns, particularly around COVID and schools, but also on cuts and Tower Awards. Really pleased to welcome John McLaughlin, who's the branch secretary of Tower Hamlets Unison.
Thank you, Alex. Look, I want to bring solidarity for the fantastic strike action that you've taken today, standing up for our most vulnerable children. And I'm just about to nip over to another meeting, and that meeting is about attacks on our day centres for adults, for dementia, for people with learning difficulties, for people who have mental health problems. And I think it's really striking that throughout the COVID crisis, we've had a government that hypocritically says to us, look at the damage that's happening to our most vulnerable children. But then they still carry on cutting support for our most vulnerable children. And they say to us they're concerned about the loneliness and the isolation of our elderly people, and yet there are cuts to our day centres. And I think what we've seen over this COVID crisis is the arguments that they can't fund these services just does not wash. If you can find billions to give to your friends of Tory MPs and cabinet ministers so they can profiteer from the COVID crisis by procurement for PPE or track and trace that doesn't work, if you can find 165 billion for defence, you can find the money for our most vulnerable members of our society. So solidarity, I have to go over. I'm sad that the meetings clash, and I'm sad that we have to be speaking up for the BOCES service, but I'm really glad and proud that people are resisting, that people are sticking up for our most vulnerable people. Our struggles are one, we are united, we have to fight collectively together to make sure we get the funding for the services that we need and put people before profit. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John, and please take our solidarity to the meeting you're about to attend, and let's link up on that as well. I'm going to go straight to our next speaker, who's also John MacDonald, MP for Hayes and Harlington, who's also been a fantastic friend to trade unions in all our struggles over the years and spoken at many rallies for the NEU. So, John.
Thanks, Alex. Just to say that I feel like a bit of an archaeological exhibit in all of this. I've been in Parliament over 20 years, and I just want to say this to people, and it's not often recognised. Apsana's only been in Parliament for a matter of months, but she's had an remarkable effect. And on every dispute now in Tower Hamlets, she's made sure MPs and government ministers are aware of what's going on, and she's done exactly the same in this dispute. She's worked incredibly hard, and I think I have nothing but respect for her on that. Also, just this archaeological, this how bad it is, and this is what has really angered me about this proposal from Tower Hamlets. It's taking us back almost 40 years. I started in local government in children's services in Hillingdon in the mid-1970s. I did that for 13 years, and then I was head of policy at Camden, and then I was chief executive of the Association of London Government, representing all the London boroughs in negotiations with government about, well, funding, the policy developments, etc. In that time, just to remind people, in that time, in the 70s into the 80s, we were in a situation where with children with special needs, we had all sorts of appalling names for them then at that time, if you remember. One of them was ESN, educationally subnormal. It was appalling, the attitudes towards children. And we fought hard because at that time, there was barely any mainstreaming. It was largely development special schools, and most of them, for London boroughs, most of them were out of London. Children were travelling all sorts of distances. And there was a real fight by a number of us in social services and in education to try and get some recognition. And different boroughs did different things. They applied different routes, but actually they were pretty successful into the 90s. Tower Hamlets did exactly, they invested in the special learning services to give support for teachers and to give support to the children, the teachers, but also families and parents as well. And actually, if you look back on the history of this, in London local government at that time, Tower Hamlets was one of those boroughs who, as a result of investment in that way, actually dramatically changed the lives of large numbers of children and their families. It gave them educational opportunities they'd never dreamt of before. And this is what's really got to me. What Tower Hamlets are doing now are taking us back a generation at least. And we will reap the damage of this for generations to come. It took us decades to change the mentality of this policy. It took us a couple of decades to get the investment on the ground. And then what is, I think, just looking back on it, the people who worked, including yourselves, transformed people's lives. It's been a huge success. This just turns the clock back, and that's why, you're inspiring people like me and others to actually shout out about it now, because we can't let this happen. We're going to destroy children's life opportunities and life chances, especially at a time when, to be honest, they're under so much pressure from other challenges. And some of you may have seen the Joseph Rowntree report, 2.5 million of our people, fellow residents in destitution, 500,000 children living in destitution. There's enough for children to cope with, then have this as well. And I also, it flies in the face of everything logical, if you like. You're doing that, you're successful. You're making sure the children who have the can and mainstream settings, you're making sure there's support for the families, you're making sure there's support for the teachers, but you're doing it, and this, I come at it, and I was Shadow Chancellor, I just come at it economically as well. You're doing it in a cost-effective way. And what they're going to do now, they'll cut the service if they get away with it, and it will cost them more money. I completely agree with what Alex has said it, or others, Alison. Parents will be demanding the care plans and all the rest of it. They will be asking for second opinions. It will cost more in terms of children going into special schools and special school transport services. It is I think, such a short-term saving that will have long-term costs. And somehow we've got to get Tower Hamlets around the negotiating table, because I think we can win the arguments and seek a resolution of this. And if there's any role that I and Apsana can do as MPs, is to make sure others become aware of this issue, the irrationality of Tower Hamlets' behaviour, but also, yes, of course, the government's implication in this in terms of the scale of cuts as a result of austerity that's been going on. So I just give you this pledge. I'll do everything I possibly can, working with Apsana, to make sure government ministers, other MPs and others are fully aware of the implications of this and how significant it is, actually not just in Tower Hamlets, because you know as well as I do, other local authorities will start using this as the model to push us back into the dark ages of the 1970s and 80s. And I think that, to be honest, my view, it's criminal. Anyway, 100% solidarity and support.
Thanks very much, John. After all those years in Parliament, it's great to see the fire still in your belly, and really appreciate you coming tonight. A really useful reminder of the history of the awful way that SEND children have been treated, and something we won't allow ourselves to go back to. So thank you for that. It seems the appropriate time to now hear from Roland Ramanan, who is the head of the Support for Learning Service, a person whose job is being deleted from if these proposals go ahead. So Roland, I hope you're still here.
Yep, I'm still here. Thank you very much,
welcome,
Alex.
Roland.
My job is the least of it. I joined the Support for Learning Service around 1995, when the service had just been reorganised, and I've been through at least 2 other major reorganisations in the service, and this is by far the worst in terms of the way it's been planned and handled. I wasn't able to make it to the demonstration today, but I would just like to pay tribute to the representatives, Amanda and Alison, because I know they give an incredible amount of support to the staff at the Support for Learning Service. They make a massive, massive difference, because the stress that my team has been under for over 2 years, 3 years, as this process has ground on, has just been incredible. And everyone in the service, I'm so proud of them, because they are so dedicated to what they do, and they keep the wheels turning, and they support pupils despite being ground under every day by this process. Local authorities are massive machines, and they can do some things brilliantly, and I'm not saying that Tower Hamlets doesn't do great things in other areas of SEN, because they do have that commitment. But in this case, they are getting a lot of things wrong, and doing a lot of things really stupidly and really badly. And what is most disappointing to me is the lack of planning, the lack of foresight, despite having over 2 years, 2 consultants, 3 project managers, and they've managed to come up with what I could have written on the back of a cereal packet at the end of that process, with no planning for the pupils who are involved, everything coming too little, too late. There is a glimmer of hope that the people in charge are actually listening to what the implications are. But what's been very disappointing is they have not listened to the incredible expertise in the service. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about other managers and people who work in the Support for Learning Service who have incredible expertise that could have been lent to this process and has basically been ignored all the way through. Now, people in the service will know that my biggest concern in this reorganization is the support for pupils with a vision impairment and deaf and partially hearing, because what is being proposed is just not sustainable for all the reasons that previous speakers have said. It will just lead to a rise in applications for out-of-borough placements, a rise in tribunals. It doesn't make economic sense. And now that local authorities have a bit more central government funding, it means that the money which is retained for our service now forms a smaller percentage of the pot overall. So there's actually less legitimate reason to cut those services as much. So that is recognised, but I just pray and hope that that will make a difference in the final analysis. Would also say that even the jobs which are being retained, which I'm very grateful for, key jobs around physical disability and complex medical conditions and so on, the way that the restructure has been handled has managed to alienate even the people who are retaining those posts. And that is a danger. It's a long-term danger, because it means those people will eventually leave, even if they don't leave immediately. And what is being offered in terms of the jobs that are being retained, the council may find very hard to fill. And when it comes to sensory impairment, that is fatal. And we've seen across the country, other services for sensory impairment have been through the same cycle and have had to claw the service back. And it's a hard job to do that over many years. So I just would like to pay tribute to the reps and to my team, and really hope that Tower Hamlets reconsiders these decisions at the last minute. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roland. Important reminder there that these people who are on strike today will be in work tomorrow, doing the job that they love, the job that they want to continue doing. And we'll hope that we can talk to Tower Hamlets Council about that. If we don't get anywhere, we have today given notice of further days of strike action in the new year, which we hope we don't have to take, but we hope that Tower Hamlets will see that as a serious intent and come back to us to talk. We're now going to, that's the end of our sort of programme speakers, but we've got a bit of time if there are people who want to make brief contributions. I've got a couple of people have requested. First of all, I'm really pleased to welcome Becky, I hope that's the right Becky, from Leeway School in Hackney, which is a special school, independent special school, where members have been on strike today and last week over wanting fair pay for themselves, to have equality with teachers in the public sector, I believe. I don't know all the details of it. But Becky, is that you?
Yeah, hello there. Thank you very much for giving us this bit of time. And firstly, just a kind of a big well done to all of you guys and all of your hard work. And certainly from Leeways, and I've seen so many others as well, we fully support you, and please have our solidarity in what you're trying to achieve. And fingers crossed that, like you've just said, they do listen and it is achieved, because it is so important. I think you've just hit the nail on the head for me, really. Everyone that works in the SEN sector, everyone part of this meeting right now, has got something in common, and that's that they're passionate about the children that they work with. We wouldn't be in this job if we didn't care a lot for the pupils that we're working with, the people that we're working with, and having outcomes that we want to achieve. And it's so frustrating when simply all we're asking for is equality and to be valued and to value our young people. You know, they don't always have a voice, and if they do have a voice, it's maybe not being heard. So us demonstrating, us speaking up, using our voices, standing together, we're doing that for our young people. So thank you so much for doing that. We stand with you there. Just to kind of give you a bit of information about what we're doing, and actually it's quite sad really listening to your story, and Dave from the NEU was sharing the story of Tower Hamlets with our demonstration earlier. And realistically, I work in Leeways, which is in Hackney. It's an independent school, and we have a lot of money. Our pupils get a hell of a lot of money. We're funded very well, but unfortunately it's going in the wrong places. Like you've just said, our kind of school runs like a business, and we're not being valued as the teachers, and we also feel very strongly that our pupils not being valued. So we're really fighting for that. Within the SEN sector, we need to put so much in place, and it's fantastic having passionate teachers and passionate staff members that work with our young people, but we need so much more, and it really needs to be valued. So we are really doing our best to kind of get the provision up and running and have everything in place that our young people deserve. But I really hope that with your situation in Tower Hamlets that you are listened to, because all of you're doing a fantastic job, and everyone that's working so hard for it, we wish you the best, and we show you solidarity from Leeways.
Thank you, Becky. Thanks for coming, and please take solidarity from this meeting from the NEU in Tower Hamlets back to your colleagues. I'll try and visit your next picket line. If Dave gives me the dates as an exec member, I'll try and come down and meet you and your colleagues. So thanks.
That would be great. Thank you so much, guys, and best of luck.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Our next speaker has put a hand up. Kirsty Payton is from Greenwich NEU and a colleague of mine on the NEU National Executive. Kirsty.
Hi, thanks very much, and well done, and solidarity to everyone that was out on the very cold picket this morning. I couldn't make it myself. I had some casework, but my husband managed to pop along and give greetings from Greenwich. I think, you know, John's left the meeting now, but he's absolutely right about the direction of travel in terms of what these attacks mean for our children with SEND needs. And I was quite shocked to hear that up to 17% of children with ECHPs actually end up in pupil referral units. And that's no disrespect to what pupil referral units do and offer, but we know that that is not always the appropriate place, and often isn't the appropriate place for children with SEND. And in fact, this is what happens if you don't, as Upsana pointed out and others have pointed out, actually address the needs very early on in the development of the child. You end up with an incredibly chaotic, disorganized, and frankly, you know, discriminatory approach. And I think the other aspect of this is the impact of privatization and academization. Again, no disrespect to some of our colleagues that have to work in academies and have to work in the independent sector. But as others have pointed out, you know, the whole vision of education was based on the idea that we plan provision across a local authority, which is funded directly through government, and that we trust through the democratically elected bodies like councils to be able to assign that provision. And I know for a fact that, you know, unfortunately in Greenwich, and we know this is very true of other parts of the country, where so many of our schools have left local authority control, that the local council no longer receives that money. It goes directly to the multi-academy trusts in the form of the general annual grant. And of course, it's then left to them to decide whether they want to pay for the SEND provision. And you and I know, as the, you know, as the previous speakers said, from Leeways, is that they run them as businesses. And what do they want? They want it on the cheap. You know, they want people who are not qualified on agency contracts. And my final remark would be is that Tower Hamlets Council are previous on this. Look how despicably they treated our colleagues around the Tower Rewards attacks. My concern is they're going to be a tough nut to crack. And I think the 27 very, very inspiring people who went out today cannot be the only 27 next time. You know, we know that strike action is something that we take with a great kind of, you know, a great lot of thought, because we know the impact it has. But my own view on this, and I fully support those that have been out on strike, is I think you have to be prepared to escalate your action. But that we can't leave you on your own. Yeah, you will need parental support, you will need the support of the wider community, of our labour movement, of other unions, and ultimately the NEU. Because if it is the case that those members of staff that do decide to stay with the provision end up on worse contracts, that's not going to be the first and last of it. If they manage to get away with forcing teachers onto these reward contracts, which mean attacks on our redundancy, on pension rights and sick rights, they won't stop there. And we have to appeal to every NEU member in Tower Hamlets and beyond, in London and beyond, that your struggle is our struggle. So I want to give you 100% support. I'm sorry I couldn't make it today. If you give me the notice, and I think we can win it, but we will have to escalate it. And I don't just mean that in the traditional industrial sense. I mean it as a campaign that really ignites people's passions, because we don't want to, as John said, go back to the 70s and 80s when so many of our children fell through the net and ended up in very, very difficult circumstances. So well done, folks.
Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks for your support from Greenwich and as an exec member. We're aiming to finish at 6:30 or just after, but we've got time for some short contributions. Caroline Woodley is a Hackney councillor, I believe.
Hi, yes, that's right. I'll keep it brief then as you're coming to the end. I'm lead member for Families, Early Years and Play, and I have responsibility for special educational needs over in Hackney. And I'm here, I guess, like many of you, primarily out of frustration. I'm frustrated that it takes councils having to make nightmare decisions and jobs coming under threat and staff having to strike to bring SEND onto a wider national agenda. And I know how important the NEU has been to all staff this year. School staff this year, you've done amazing work getting key issues onto the national agenda. And I just want to say thank you, actually, for that. Even without COVID, the rise in demand we've experienced in Hackney this difficult year means we face a cumulative debt of around 13 million. Some other councils are facing up to 50 million. And although we have a kind of an agreement with the government that we can carry reserves over, we don't know on what terms we might have to recover that debt. We have been told there will be conditions applied. I think the latest letter from Vicky Ford, they were described as tough conditions. So it'd be interesting to know what those are. So any responsible council does not want to carry such significant debt, which means that you are looking to make efficiencies and cuts. It's a nightmare. I've been writing to the Secretary of State to give him a monthly update on our SEND cost pressures in Hackney. We've seen the Education Select Committee chair refer to SEND as an adversarial system. We've seen the SEND review push back again. We've seen the SEND All-Party Parliamentary Group present first-hand accounts from children and young people, parents and researchers exploring the impact of COVID-19, many of whom expressed the great difficulties they faced this last year, and many of whom emphasise the incredible value of specialist support and the great importance of access to it. We know that for our children and young people, behaviour is so often tied to communication, and specialist staff are key to securing and maintaining vital lines of communication. And without it, we know the consequences can be absolutely devastating for our children. So I am here to show solidarity with specialist support staff. I have met with my counterpart in Tower Hamlets to try and understand the situation. I do think you are being heard, and I appreciate the constructive and thoughtful words that I've heard here today from Roland and others. I'm here because we have around 50 Hackney children and young people at school in Tower Hamlets. And I'm here because in February, Hackney joined with Tower Hamlets to campaign for more support for SEND, and we need to continue to work together to address what is actually a national crisis. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Caroline. And whatever happens, we've got to keep fighting for the funds our children need, our schools need, and the more work we can do together across councils, the better. So thanks very much for that, for your commitment to that, and the NEU commits to doing that as well. So thank you very much for coming. Nicola Baker works at the Behaviour and Attendance Support Service, the BAS team, who aren't in this restructure, but we think might be in a restructure later on down the line. So they do important work. They work with people from the Support for Learning Service, not out on strike today, but Nicola, I believe you want to share some solidarity with them.
Absolutely. I also want to say I have taught in Tower Hamlets since 1986, and I was a teacher in a Tower Hamlets secondary school in those really awful years that John McDonnell so brilliantly described earlier. We absolutely don't want to go back to that. We need to understand the history of Tower Hamlets and the history of inclusion in Tower Hamlets. And I'm really sorry to say that the people making these cuts do not understand that history. They don't understand how the enormous investment that was put into Tower Hamlets and other boroughs like it in the 1990s led to incredible outcomes for all of our young people. Tower Hamlets went from the bottom of league tables up to the top, and we can't let that slide. We have to ensure that our young people get the very best outcomes. Now, the cuts that are being proposed are not going to lead to that. Roland and others have talked so well about the sensory impairment service, but I think we also need to remember that it's the language and communication team and the specific learning difficulties team. At a previous meeting, Jenny, one of our colleagues, really brilliantly described the impact that these cuts would have on young people if their needs are not understood and met. And actually the fact that people who have specific learning difficulties often end up in PRUs and sadly often end up in prison. And we need to look at those long-term outcomes and remember them. These cuts are not being made intelligently. Inclusion is not being understood. There is a fantastic wealth of resource in the Support for Learning service, in the behaviour and attendance team. That resource is sadly being ignored by the leaders in our council. They don't respect us. They don't respect what we do. And I just think it's really sad, and we have to fight for it because, as somebody said before, once it's gone, we won't get it back. That expertise has been built up over years. I'm proud to say I've worked in Tower Hamlets since 1986. I hope that, you know, the other people will carry on and want to stay as well, but they won't if they don't get the support from people like us. And when we're gone, they won't get that support.
Thank you, Nicola. Brilliant contribution. Thanks very much for that. As someone who's been around about the same time as you, I endorse everything you've said. I think that leads us on then to our final speaker. I'm going to call our final speaker, and then I'm going to ask you all to unmute yourselves so you can applaud our members who've been on strike, as I know you'd want to do if we were all together. Amanda Bentham is our co-rep at the Support for Learning service. Amanda.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I don't really think I've got an awful lot to add. It's just to say that it was absolutely brilliant to share time, actually face-to-face time. First time that a lot of colleagues have seen each other for a long time, who work for the Support for Learning service. So to be out today on our strike day in Mile End in the middle of a pandemic, you know, it wasn't an easy choice to make, to take strike action and then to actually go out on the streets. It was something that we discussed for a long time before we decided what to do. We did a banner drop off the Green Bridge in Mile End. Most of the strikers were there and lots of supporters. Big thank you to everybody who came. We had about 40 people there. There were parents, Labour Party members. We had some brilliant people from the London Renters Union. We had members of the Labour Party from Tower Hamlets, Leighton and Wanstead CLP, Hackney North. Oh, great, there's a photo of the banner. We had a Labour councillor who's on this call, Councillor Gabriella Salva McCallan. Lots of support from passing traffic. Alex said at the beginning of the meeting that we had a fire engine and members of the FBU setting off their siren for us. We had ambulance workers, key workers actually, loads of buses tooting for us, and that really, really helped raise morale. Two of our strikers were spreading the word from home. They were not working from home, they were striking from home, and they were on social media all day. We got support on social media from Apsana Begum, who's spoken, from John McDonnell, who's spoken, and from lots of others. We have schools supporting us, including members at Morpeth, who took some placards and some banners and had photos taken, and Bow School, I believe they did. I think lots of schools did something for us today. The demonstration was loud, it was visible, and it's been widely shared. And I think our next steps are really to think about what we will do in January when we take further strike action if the council doesn't back down, and that will be in mid-January. So just to say thank you, everybody, all the strikers, all the supporters, everybody who's come this evening. It really has raised our morale. It has helped us to see the bigger picture. This is not a Tower Hamlets issue. This is a national issue, and we must keep raising it until we win. Thank you, and thanks, Alex, for chairing this meeting.
Thanks, Amanda. There is clearly a lot of support for this campaign, and it's something we want to build. Today, I think, was the strangest strike action I've ever been involved in, and I'm sure others feel the same. So I don't think there's anything more for me to say. I'm going to ask you all to unmute yourselves, and let's have a round of applause for the NEU members at the SLS who've been on strike.
Yeah, yeah.
Well done.
Well done, folks.